everyone, Anarch here. So this is part 5 of the reading list that I've been doing for these last few Anarch abridged episodes. And this one will probably be shorter than the last few. And that's because we've actually reached the very last section on this list. And this one I put last because in a general sense, this may be a topic which would have been approached first in a lot of these lists. And that is economics. So this is a pretty short list in a general sense because I'm going to just try to keep it very concise. And also keep in mind that, I'm only going to include things on this list that I've actually read. Also keep in mind that it's not as if I agree with like every last detail of the things that are in this. I think that what you'll find is that this topic has a lot of different opinions, even on the left. So there's a lot of different perspectives one might take on the topic of economics. Nonetheless, I have tried to only stay within authors that are either anarchist or which might be said to be sort of sympathetic to anarchism. The first one on the list is Mikhail Bakunin's The Capitalist System. So this is actually a pretty short essay, but I've actually found that this one is a very good introduction to anti-capitalism for people that may not really understand the anti-capitalist critique. And as I've said, Bakunin is an anarchist. And so you might actually have found that anarchist texts in a general sense are more wide-spanning, like they cover a lot more topics all at once. But this is the place where you'll just find Bakunin sort of like going in on the capitalist system. It should also be said that this critique, like some of the other critiques that are on this list, were very influenced by Marx's Capital. So that one is kind of an implicit recommendation, but I think you've probably only been recommended that 1,000 times at this point, so I'm really not going to include it. But Bakunin was very influenced by Marx's economic theory. So I think what you'll find here is a sort of anarchist restatement of the Marxian conception of economic exploitation and why that the capitalist system is so rotten. I think it's one that I found that has been very helpful in introducing people to leftism as well. I've given it to a few people that were kind of like right there on that border of anti-capitalism, but weren't all the way there. And it served as a good primer. It sort of like inflamed their sense of outrage, you might say. So I should also note this one has a pretty good audiobook reading that is on Audible Anarchist, which I will try to also put down in the links. Moving on quite quickly. What I've put here is not Marx's Capital, but a sort of summary of Karl Marx's Capital by Cafiero. And Cafiero was one of the early anarchists. I suppose not the absolute earliest, insofar as we'd be talking then about, say, the early 1800s. But Cafiero was, sort of like in this late 1800s or mid to late 1800s period, was one of the most influential early anarchists. And he, to my understanding, started as a Marxist and moved more towards anarchism as time went on. And this is a short essay, or not that short, but relatively short, where what Cafiero is doing is basically explaining Marx's Capital to us in a way which is understandable. So this might actually be a great piece for you to read. If you intend to go on to read Marx's Capital, this is a great place to start. It will probably ensure that you understand a lot more of what is in the book than you would have if you just went into it guns blazing without any, preparation beforehand. So I highly recommend it. I found it to be a very good summary, and it should be said, most notably, that Marx actually gave it his seal of approval as perhaps the best, summary, the best short introduction to Capital that he had read, or something to that effect. Don't quote me on that specific, but Marx basically said that it was a good summary of Capital, and that very few, short summaries or introductions to Capital had been written. So with that in mind, you can just understand that this is not just an anarchist's view on Marx's Capital. Marx himself thought this was a good summary of Capital. The next one is No Bosses by Michael Albert. This is a book that is sort of like succinctly laying out the arguments for participatory economics, but more broadly, it's also criticizing the structure of capitalism. It's criticizing the boss-worker relation and the way that labor plays out in workplaces under capitalism. But more than that, it lays out an alternative structure. And I think what you'll probably find a lot in my work is that I think that we have to do more than be deconstructive. I think we also have to be constructive. That is to say, we also have to say what it is that we actually want. What kind of system is it that we actually would put in place? I won't pretend that I don't have some criticisms of participatory economics, one of which being that it still maintains a money system. But I think that it nonetheless gives us a very good model for how a decentralized economic decision-making could be carried out. And this work of creating participatory economics, or Paracon, as you may have heard it called numerous times, was a work together between Michael Albert and I think it's Robert Hanel. And the two of them are actually, very educated and have a lot of insights into how good economic planning might take place. One that I haven't put on here because I've not read yet, but Hanel, I'm not sure how it's said, also wrote a book, I think called Anarchist Accounting, which is sort of going into the nitty-gritty of how economic accounting might take place under a decentralized or anarchist method. So I think what you'll find is that it's written really at this wonderful intersection of it's kind of understandable to the layman, no bosses that is. It's written at the level that the layman could definitely understand it, but those who maybe have more sophisticated questions or criticisms would really find that the majority of those are going to be answered within this text. They really endeavored, or Albert really endeavored to create a text here which answers a very broad variety of questions. I found it very compelling, and I think you probably will too. I have not yet located a link for this, but obviously the book is purchasable. If I do locate a link, just expect it to be down there in the reading list. Towards the bottom, obviously, as I said, we're in the economics section, which is the very end of the list. I think this book is a great book to give to people who are just looking at an introduction for some anti-capitalist critique and a possible alternative system. So if you're just kind of looking to understand Paracon, or you're just kind of broadly trying to understand how would we even decentrally manage an economy, I think that this book is an excellent place to look. The last two that are on this list, they are both based around what the theory is based around the theory called Capital as Power, written by two economic scholars, Bickler and Nitzan. So this economic theory that is written by Bickler and Nitzan, Capital as Power, is it was developed as a sort of elaboration of an anti-capitalist critique that had moved past Marxist critique, that no longer was had to tie itself to the labor theory of value, for example, as one example. And I think what you'll find is that it is in many ways more robust for it. The first of these, Capital as Power Toward a New Cosmology of Capitalism, you'll note that these last two both have the title, the beginning title, "Capital is Power," but what is different is the subtitle on the two. This one is the introduction of the two. So what you're going to find here is they are sort of giving you the conceptual introduction to what capital is power is, and some of the base criticisms. And it's built for people that are just kind of curious to get started on their ideas, and before you might ever want to like dive into the economics and the mathematics. I think it's a great primer for that reason. I've actually quoted it, and I think, I don't know if it was one or two different videos. It has some very good insight in it. And I think it also is very useful in supporting a sort of dual power or a counter power approach, wherein we construct the alternative structures within the belly of what currently exists. Even though that's not something that they like, lay out in extensive depth, I think that is very much implied in the analysis that they are doing of capitalism. So that one is really, really good. I think that's a great place to start if you are interested in understanding capital as power. And then we move on to, of course, the main book, Capital as Power, the subtitle being A Study of Order and Creorder. So this one you might say is kind of like the magnum opus. I suppose they've still got lives ahead of them, and perhaps they'll write something even more influential after this book. But I think what you'll find is that this is where like the basis of their economic theory and critique, their responses to other schools of thought within economics, their analysis of history and how power circulates and interacts with economic value. This is where it is really explicitly laid out. So this is such a sophisticated theory that it is embodied in even mathematical formulas. So we've moved beyond just kind of talking about loose conceptions, which might be said to be sort of like philosophical or social structural, and we are now moving on to things which are statements which can be actually measured and discussed as mathematical formulations. And I think that's very important. I think that formed a lot of the connection to Marxism as a sort of scientific economic endeavor, was that it was, measurable. It did have formulas which could be understood and reorganized and used and so on. But what you'll find here is their reasoning as to why they find not only obviously capitalist economics to be severely wanting, but Marxist economic theory to be wanting as well. And I should say, if that turns any of you off, because I understand I probably have a few people that would consider them Marxist in economics, who do watch these videos, just understand that they were once Marxists. Like, I think this is a very important thing to note. This is not going to be a naive critique. They're not going to stumble their way through this. They were people who are very well-studied Marxist, economists, and therefore they understand Marx very well. So when you go into this, because towards the beginning, you're going to find that it starts with critiques of other perspectives. Try to keep an open mind, because I think you'll find that these critiques are actually very solid critiques. These are not empty. These are substantive, and these substantive critiques represent part of the reason they moved away from Marxist economics and toward this theory that they are calling capital as power. So I want to spend just a moment talking about what this theory of capital of power is. It is actually an economic theory which I've mentioned in numerous of my videos, but it is pretty much what it says in the name. It's the conception that what capital actually is power to organize and reorganize the economy. So their conception of power, if you've watched enough of my work, you're aware that I have my own definition of power, which is power to. It's basically your ability to carry things out, to enact your will. But theirs is more similar to power over. That is to say, the ability to extract obedience from masses of people, but also of industry, the ability to distribute and redistribute goods and services. That's what capital really represents, the ability to command the flow of things. So you'll find that there's a lot of overlap in this analysis between the anarchist analysis of economics and of power more broadly. And that's part of the reason I think you'll find that a lot of anarchists are very amenable to it. In a way, it is almost as if what they've done is studied Marxist economics very, very closely, and the incompleteness that they found led them to essentially uncovering anarchist understandings, which is that the underlying thing, which is really moving and shifting and changing society, including economics, is power and the ability to extract obedience from large swaths of the population. And one thing that they really lay out is how this conception is by far the most robust, not only ideologically, which I think would be a trivial observation for anybody who calls themselves an anarchist, but insofar as we actually describe the real movement of the economy. And I think that's one of the most important aspects to emphasize within this work, is that they scrupulously lay out how capital as power makes the best predictions of any economic theory. And that insofar as we are trying to ground our conception of economics within a basis, a measurable material basis, then it has the strongest claim to being the scientific methodology for understanding the economy. And this is a deeply vindicating economic analysis for anarchists. So I think if you're an anarchist and you're looking for an alternative to that sort of labor theory of value economics, which was presented in the sort of Marxist conception from these last few essays I described, I think that you're going to find that capital as power is up your alley. But I have to prepare you. Just as the end of many of these categories, this book is very dense. So parts of it are going to be totally understandable. I think that the layman can understand, significant chunks of the book, but it does not shy away from, deeply citing its sources, from using mathematical formulations and discussing mathematical formulations and looking and making graphs and plotting data and all of that. So I think you're going to find that it's very rigorous. It's very scientifically backed. And if that scares you, I understand. But I would still recommend kind of like browsing through it, getting to understand some of its perspectives and arguments, because it's going to be very educational regardless of if you understand the mathematics. I would not get too hung up on that math. I would say that you should try to proceed through the work and just understand what they're saying more broadly. So, yeah, that's the end of the reading list, my friends. I know that these videos haven't performed nearly as well as a lot of other Anarch-abridged videos, but I felt compelled to create this reading list and to finish it out, because I think I've just been asked this numerous times since the channel has begun, and I just wanted this to be created and to exist, and for if people are looking for my reading list, I can just point them towards these videos. Would also like to suggest, if you like the readings I am, recommending here, if you end up finding them insightful, share around the chunks of the reading list that you like, recommend it to other people, so that they can also make contact with some of these works. I think there's a lot of really important stuff in here, and I tried to create a reading list which was going to answer a lot of different kinds of questions. Obviously I've left stuff out, that much is like a trivial observation. But I think that if you were to read everything in this list, I think that you would, number one, you would understand my work very well by the end of it. I think that you would have gathered a much stronger understanding of the work that I do here on the channel. But I think also more broadly, you're going to have a really good coverage of just kind of like, political power and history and economics in a general sense. So, yeah. That is the last video in the reading list series. Next week, I will just be proceeding back to, you know, those one-off Anarch Abridged videos. I would like to suggest that if you liked this video, go click like. If you enjoy this and you want to see more from the channel, go click subscribe. Go comment below if you've got ideas for another Anarch Abridged. And or if you like any of these texts or you have commentary, you want to get people to go read these texts, please go comment below. Tell people which of these texts you like and which ones you like as well. Lastly, I just want to say, if you appreciate the work that I'm doing here on this channel, I'm actually in a very important period in this channel's development and growth. And that is to say, my Patreon is very close to being able to be my full-time job. But I'm not at a place yet where it can pay my bills and that I can also get groceries and eat and live. So, if you become a patron right now, this is a very important time to become a patron. I would appreciate it now more than many other times, because it would make such a big difference in my life if I were to be able to move to making the videos on this channel with all of my time instead of just part of my time. So if that is of interest to you, please go to my Patreon at patreon.com/anarch, which of course, link is going to be in the description. That's the spiel, my friends, and I will see you next week.